I'm Ashton Addison from BlockWest Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Yves LaRose, CEO and founder of the EOS Network Foundation. Yves, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Hi, Ashton. Thank you very much for having me on. Really excited about this show.
Me too. I feel like there's a lot to catch up on. The market's been going crazy every which direction, and I'm sure your team is just still heads down working on this EOS Network Foundation. Let's just kick it off with a little bit on some of the solutions that your team is really focused on right now, and then we'll dive into everything into EOS.
Sure. So yes, you're right. The markets right now are a good opportunity to actually put your head down and continue building. And that's really what the ENF was created to do. So we came out of an ecosystem that was essentially starved of funding for the last 4 years. And upon the creation of the ENF, the EOS Network Foundation, it gave us access to the means to be able to make decisions, financial and non-financial decisions, in a very coordinated manner for the network, and to be able to accelerate that process of development, of not just maintenance, but also of growth for the network. So the ENF essentially is in charge of, or is in a way very similar to other foundations within the blockchain space, where it coordinates the code creation, the code maintenance, the development roadmap of that code base, but also outside of code, business development wise, in terms of directions for the network. Where should are there opportunities out there, and where should the network be placing some of its funding in order to be able to open doors so that when an opportunity comes about, the network is ready for that. And so very much the ENF is really busy right now within, I guess, the current market conditions, not just to position ourselves for what's inevitably to come throughout these these cycles, but more so as well catching up the lost time that the network has had over the last couple of years.
Great intro, Yves. And you're right, there's so much that the Network Foundation has to do in terms of like the departments on where it can help. And you mentioned there about allocating funding to the right projects and the proper projects. I feel like that's a huge one, to make sure that the capital goes to the right spot. And I know that there's other networks that have had big grant programs that ended up not being the best use of the capital. So I'm interested in that. But I would love to just get more of a high level on all of those areas of interest that you mentioned. Where do you specifically are focusing the most of your time in helping grow the network?
This is a really good question. So one of the advantages with somewhat being late to the party, in a sense, is that we're able to look at what other ecosystems did over the last couple of years. Importantly, what they did well, but also in a way more importantly, what they didn't do well, and where maybe they had some learning opportunities because they did something and didn't turn out to work out very much. And so we are really having that advantage of foresight, having the opportunity to look at others. And so we've developed, like you mentioned, we've got a grant framework, but others have grant frameworks and such. What we've done is be able to accelerate that process of creating the frameworks for the network to be able to accommodate the financial and non-financial support of businesses, individuals, and developers within the ecosystem, and creating them in a way that obviously is attuned to our reality, but also is very much cognizant of what others in the ecosystem, the greater blockchain ecosystem, have learned and have done. And so over the last 9 months with the EOS Network Foundation, we've laid out these pillars or these different funding buckets, for example, to try and cater to different types of stakeholders. So we've got, obviously within the ecosystem, within EOS, but outside of EOS as well, we see these pockets of different types of stakeholders that are constant, and they emerge, and we see these trends and these patterns. And we've tried to create buckets for them so that ideally when somebody comes to the EOS ecosystem, they get sorted in a way, or they get directed to the right mechanism that suits their particular needs as quickly and as efficiently as possible, so that we can deploy the capital in the proper mechanism that suits their particular needs within the shortest amount of time as possible. So we've done this through a grant framework. We've done this through what we call Pomelo on EOS, which is the equivalent of Gitcoin on Ethereum, which is quadratic funding created by Vitalik Buterin. So we have our own mechanism there. We also have a governance layer called Eden that is also getting funded by the network, kind of as an experimental layer of continual growth of governance on EOS that doesn't necessarily leverage the token holder weights, which is what is traditional in DPoS. And so we've got these different venues essentially that cater to different types of stakeholders. And all of them are being funded in a very coordinated and efficient manner because of that, I guess, advantage of foresight of being late to the party.
Very interesting. And throughout the last months, a lot of startups, I was talking to some other network founders, and in part because of the crash of the Luna ecosystem, there were a lot of startups there that were getting grants for that, and all of a sudden they had to move to other networks to build on. And I feel like this is a great opportunity for networks like EOS to have a bunch of startups, whether they're at 0.0 or they're already halfway to building something amazing, to move onto a network that is good for their needs. And I'm guessing that this was a great opportunity for EOS as well. Can you talk about, say it was looking through the eyes of a startup that needed to switch to a network that is great. What are they looking at, and then how are you looking at them to make sure that the right projects are coming in and that they're easily integrated into the EOS network?
Well, so I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. It is really unfortunate what happened to Terra, not just because of within Terra and the Terra ecosystem, but the ramifications throughout the whole industry. It is definitely a learning opportunity for the industry to, in a way, level up after this. And for EOS, it really is an opportunity because we didn't have any liabilities. So again, going back to this idea that EOS wasn't at the party, EOS was really late to the party, we didn't feel any of those direct effects because we didn't have the partnerships with those chains that were all linked together through Terra, or that were providing some of the collateral and such. And so as much as that was a disadvantage over the last couple of years, it's turning out to be an advantage because EOS, the network itself, and the foundation being new and the way that it's set up doesn't have any liabilities. So what we are experiencing right now is very much what you just mentioned. It's an opportunity to be able to be the home of those developers that are now looking for somewhere to deploy on. And there are a few mechanisms by which we're trying to attract them. So one of them is that EOS never had deployed the capital, the resources, and the code to be able to be EVM compatible. And we know that by now, in order to attract the vast majority of developers, having that EVM compatibility natively at your L1 level is incredibly important, because Ethereum has done amazing work, and the Ethereum ecosystem has done amazing work over the last 5 years or so to be able to really be that bed for developers because of all the libraries they have and all the tools and the framing, everything they have, the access to funding that they've had as well. And so opening those doors up and making it so that those developers can very easily and efficiently come onto EOS is one of the things that we've been focusing on. So right now, the EVM, full RPC EVM compatibility layer is on a test net, and it is being deployed on our mainnet, and the roadmap for that is roughly September, October. So it's been running on testnet now for quite some time. So that's one mechanism that we're allowing people to come in, or we're opening the doors for developers to come in, businesses to be able to come in, and that would be the shortest path for a lot of them. Because if you're in one of these ecosystems and for some reason funding has dried out, or the costs become prohibitive because those networks for some reason have scalability issues for your particular use case, EOS becomes a very attractive use case for that, with an extremely low barrier to entry because of that full RPC EVM compatibility, where literally you're just double clicking a button, you're deploying your smart contracts and EOS, everything just works. No difference. You're still leveraging MetaMask, for example. The other way of doing so is when they're for example, in what you mentioned with Terra, where maybe somebody had started doing the work, they weren't really deployed yet, they're not necessarily EVM compatible, or they weren't created using Solidity, and now they're looking for that extra push in terms of where do they go next in terms of directions. Then we have something like the grant framework that becomes available for those people, where they would come in and apply to the network. There's an open, transparent process. We've got a lot of funding made available. The process itself is relatively easy. It goes through a mechanism that's quite quick in terms of getting an answer, yes or no. If it's a no, feedback as to why no, people go back, and we've seen them, tweak some things in their application in order to align with where the network is going, accessing funding at the seed level without any equity in return, and being able to pivot very quickly from where they were to perhaps either on EOS, or what we're seeing a lot of it is multi-chain. So as of what you mentioned with the crash with Terra and such, the ramifications as well from what we've seen is, instead of applications putting all their eggs in one basket, we're seeing a lot of them starting to put this idea of being multi-chain, being compatible with a lot of different chains at once as part of their core mission mandate, so that should something like that happen in the future, they become much more resilient. And we are very much welcoming of that, because it has multiple effects. One of them, obviously, is if we're investing in a team, a product, or something, we also want them to succeed. It becomes a two-way street. And so if they become more resilient, that's better for us as well. If they have access to other funding elsewhere, these different networks are effectively subsidizing the same product. That's an advantage to each of the networks, because then it reduces each network's ultimate cost. But also it opens the door. These products now become bridges to these other networks, other communities. We know that in blockchain, community is, if not one of the most important variables out there. So having a product that's deployed on 3 or 4 or 5 different networks, accessing and tapping into those different communities opens up those communities to each respective network as well. And that's a huge advantage for each of them, while subsidizing potentially this. So we very much favor that approach, and we've been deploying a lot of capital into projects like this. So we've seen since Terra projects apply on EOS, projects that have either already deployed or were in the midst of deploying, and now they have to go back to the drawing table. And EOS is quickly becoming one of the beds for that, one of the homes for that.
Very cool, Yves. And you mentioned there about community and how that's super important. I'm curious if this is a project by project basis, or how it works between balancing projects being able to get easy funding and just giving them the capital, and hand holding them or giving them other help, and whether they're just getting help from the Network Foundation or also between other projects that are in the community.
So we see our role as being much more than just providing financial support. So financial support is great. Obviously, it's much needed. Developers need to, or businesses need to, ultimately at the end of the day, pay rent and go out and buy some food so they can feed themselves. So funding is a key aspect to that. But the way that we approach it is that we're not simply giving financial support to those entities. We're also giving them the non-financial support. One of the things that we've quickly learned to see over the last couple of years within this space is that we have a lot of really strong developer teams that are lacking some really key components to making a business thrive or an idea come to life. And so they might be strong on the development side, but they might have maybe some weaknesses on the project management side, or the communications, marketing, legal, any of those other components that are really key for a project to succeed. We're seeing that we are able to come in and complement, because we have access to those resources internally through sweat equity, through staff essentially, that are able to come in and provide that extra support that essentially can, in a way, it's very selfish, it can come and secure our investment at the same time. So it becomes really a win-win. It becomes a partnership. If the network, or any network for that matter, makes the determination that a particular project with the funding that they're requesting and what they're saying they're able to achieve, if the network makes the determination that if that were to come about, that it would be added value to the ecosystem, then doing everything else it can in its power within its own mandate and the resources that it has access to ensure that that happens becomes very, very relevant and very key. And oftentimes we see that the non-financial support is where most of the value is being created, because the financial support kind of gives that base for that team to continue going, to be able to pay staff and such. But the non-financial support really is what makes the difference between a B product becoming an A product, or a product being able to get traction versus one that just simply couldn't get traction because they couldn't reach the finish line and they're so close, and all they needed was that extra level of support. And so we place a lot of emphasis on that, so that it's much more of a holistic view and a holistic approach to support than simply the financial aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great to hear, Yves. And I've seen a lot of projects that are often looking for strategic investors or some kind of other strategy on top of just take my money, because the more smart minds that can put their money in but also offer their expertise in the ways in the spots that they just need it. I think that's great to hear.